So thank you so much for coming to this session. As you can see from this, it's about reaching every learner, scalable, offline-first Moodle for African education, which is a lot of words, but I promise you'll actually see how this actually come together to create something that's very simple, but also hopefully actually extends what's possible with your Moodle. My name is Annora Eyt-Dessus. I'm Head of Learning Technology at King's Digital, which is part of King's College London, and I'm going to hand over, first of all, to my colleague, Alex.
Fabulous, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Spiers. I'm the e-learning content development manager at King's Digital and King's College London. And in the time-honoured tradition, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our department and our university. So King's Digital currently has 4,720 online students enrolled. We have 20 programs currently launched, and that is from across all the 8 faculties within King's College London. We are very fortunate to have students from 150 different countries around the world enrolled and learning on our courses. And we are very keen to provide transformative, high-quality education so that our students can learn wherever they are. So just to take you back a little bit, always good to have a bit of history. 10 years ago, King's Digital started up in a very kind of like small way. We had a handful of developers and technologists, and that has since grown over the piece to over 120 staff currently, and at an expansion of the functional areas that you can see here. So we've got our operations department, which manages the life cycle of our King's programs from the initial development, launch, delivery, and continuous improvement. We've got our very brand new kind of like student success area, which has just kind of like started in the past year. And that is there to ensure that every individual student feels valued and supported at the college. They're there to coach our students to achieve their goals and help students navigate the smoothest route through King's procedures. And as you can imagine, they can be challenging. The success and experience of every student is our collective responsibility within King's Digital. And then finally, there's the production area, which I am part of, and as we are all part of, and we've got kind of like the key areas that I kind of like look after. So I look after the content developers, and they design and build interactive modules across all our platforms, our main one being Moodle, but we also kind of like build for FutureLearn and edX and a few other kind of like platforms in between, and you'll hear some more about that later on. We work in close partnership with our learning technology team and the UX specialists and web developers in that team to ensure that our development at every stage is collaborative, and that's kind of been one of the key words that I've noticed over kind of like the past couple of days. This approach really ensures that each module benefits from a blend of educational, technical, and user-focused perspectives, and that's absolutely crucial for what we do. And just one other thing to say, this is another kind of like key element that's happened over the past couple of days. Accessibility isn't just a requirement for us, it's a core value. It's absolutely essential to what we do. Our content developers go beyond compliance to ensure that all content is inclusive and usable by every one of our students. Let me just take a quick drink. So just to give you a little bit of context before kind of like I hand over to my colleagues. Currently, as I said, we have Eyt-Dessus, which is what we call our Moodle platform. And that is a traditional kind of like Moodle platform, has a standard range of plugins. But we have something quite unique at King's. It's our design system, and that is being developed in-house to add additional styling and content and icons and components to that to provide that accessibility and consistency that our students really appreciate online. And a large part of that is component and content creation. And that's not just for our online courses, but that's also be used across the faculties as well. So there's a standardisation that's coming across. So that's a key thing just to keep in mind when you're listening to the rest of the presentation. That's how we currently work. Give you a little bit of background about this fantastic project that we're working on at the moment. So in 2003, King's received £10 million from Nigerian philanthropist Afi Babalola. And that was to establish the Afi Babalola African Centre for Transnational Education. The vision for the centre is based on the power of education to empower and enable Africa's talented young people to make meaningful contributions to their communities and ultimately to the world as well. The centre aims to provide online and blended programmes to 1 million young people in Africa to support successful transitions to university, employment and self-employment. And as you can see from kind of like the right hand of this side of the slide, we've got one university for every 1 million residents in Africa at the moment. So that's kind of like the background context to the project that we've been working on. And I'm going to hand back to Annora, who's going to give you a more detailed dive in some of the considerations that we had when we were working on it.
Thank you very much, Alex. So, I mean, this all sounds great, right? And theoretically, trying to deliver education at scale probably has to involve some technology. But you might realize, considering the area that we're talking about, actually there's a couple of challenges. So actually, internet and computer access are very, very limited, or at least very variable. So it's something that we can't really presume that someone will have access to a laptop or will have regular access to internet. And not only that, but there are significant divides, as we saw from the research, between urban and rural areas and different income and education levels. So some of the people who might want to reach may have access to all these things, but some of the people who are really either haven't had any education before, haven't been able to access that, or actually are quite under the poverty line, are really the people who we actually want to reach, but they don't necessarily have the technology that would enable us to reach them. This is a little bit of a concern for us. But you can see up in that top bit, phone access is substantially higher. So that made us think actually we have to focus on where our users are and what they have rather than just what we'd normally deliver for, which seems really obvious, of course. But actually, that takes quite a shift for us in terms of thinking, what does that really mean to maybe only have access to the internet every so often, and how far do you have to walk to get that internet access? And what kind of phone might you have? Is it a smartphone? Is it maybe a feature phone? What kind of things might you have on that? So it really caused us to stop and to reflect, to try to make sure that what we were delivering was actually usable by the people we wanted to reach. So, having thought about it a bit and doing some workshops with local people, one of the things that we obviously saw was it needed to be low data use and offline access. Why are those two things different? Because obviously if I can maybe log on once every so often, or maybe get enough money to get some actual credit on all that, then that would be fantastic. But if the moment that I actually log on to the platform and it downloads 12 gigabytes of data and it eats everything that I've just purchased, that's not really helpful. That's not a great education. Equally, offline access, maybe you have brief access to the internet, maybe to high-speed internet, but then you need to leave. You need to go back home. Maybe you don't have access in that way. So, okay, we need to think about how people can learn pretty much anywhere. How does that work? It needs to be secure. These are young people. This is their data. We obviously want to make sure that we're being careful with that. But also, there's no point having, 3-factor authentication for someone maybe who hasn't really accessed online education before. We don't want to add extra barriers. We're looking at huge numbers of students, so it has to be scalable, obviously. But we also want it to be exciting. This is hopefully maybe the first part of someone's journey towards online learning. You don't want it to be really boring. That's not very inspiring. That doesn't make them want to go further in their education. So we want something that's varied and active. And we also want to think about permeability, because one of the things on this is that whilst King's will develop the content, we're not necessarily going to hold it forever. This is something that we want to share more widely. It has to be permeable, as I put it, for cross-institutional content transfer. So maybe we'll share it with our partners who'll host it on their Moodles. And in that case, then we need to think about that beforehand rather than handing them something that will break as soon as they try to put it on there. And then it will be a horrible experience, and then actually all the work that we'll have done will be largely for naught. So we had to think a little bit further beyond what we normally do. And the solution that we came up with after, to be fair, considering alternatives, I want to be very clear on that, was Moodle, which is why we're here. So I could go through all of the lovely benefits that Moodle offers, but you all signed up to this conference, so I presume that hopefully you have some knowledge of these. But there were a couple of things that were really, really important for us. So for us, it was that it wasn't tied to a specific proprietary ecosystem. If we're taking millions of students, we don't want to, by default, force them to go into a particular Microsoft, Google, etc. ecosystem. That should be a choice that they're making themselves. We don't have a specific view on that, but we didn't want to tie them in because that's also their data. As I said, we needed an app with offline access, not just web access. It's okay if you want students to be able to just view some content and read some stuff. If you're happy with basically just passive absorption, then the web browser option is okay. They can download some stuff there, they can read offline. But if you want them to actually be able to actively learn and complete the activities, then that's a slightly different animal. And we also wanted it to, in a way, be widely used in that context. So we did a bit of research with some of our partners actually on the ground in Nairobi, and at least small sample. I'm sure there's some methodological questions there, but the majority of them did use Moodle. They also used WhatsApp, but we were a bit confused about that, and we decided to go forth with Moodle rather than trying to build on WhatsApp. So the Moodle app was part of our strategic choice, because it actually not only allows you to download an entire course for offline learning, but that offline learning isn't just, as I said, reading. It's actually being able to complete the quizzes, go through H5P, get some feedback, actually actively participate in that. Not only that, but in terms of sharing with our partners and being able to scale this, the fact that it syncs automatically once they reconnect was really important. There are obviously other solutions like Moodle in a box that you take somewhere and you do all that, but the syncing is definitely an issue. And also in terms of maybe if people do have internet access, we know that they're obviously in a competing environment, so actually getting the push notifications is really interesting and really worthwhile. So hopefully this turns a potential barrier into actually an opportunity for mobile learning, for something that allows flexibility, and for something that they can take with them and they can access wherever they can. So that all sounds great. What does that actually mean? So it means that we kind of had 3-4 core principles that really stayed with us, which was robustness. It has to be simple. I think we went for the KISS principle overall, keep it simple, stupid, which was if there's less moving parts, less complexity, there's less to break. If it ends up on a partner's VLE that we don't know, if someone ends up accessing it through a completely different device, the more robust it is, the less likely it is to go wrong. Accessibility is really important, as Alex said right at the beginning, for us as a team, but it's also important in this context because we don't know the needs that any of our students might be. Out of those millions of students, maybe someone has accessibility needs, so we should probably think about that. And app first. The app strips a lot of stuff out. So if it works there, it'll work pretty much everywhere. That was our baseline. And then, as I said, transferability. We need to keep it simple, not just for us, but for the future. So what does that mean? That means that we suddenly constrained ourselves to only core Moodle universal activities and resources. And that was more than enough, to be honest. We didn't use the design system, as you'll see a bit later. There were some HTML elements, but we kind of stripped out, well, actually the app stripped out for us, and therefore forced us to strip out most of it. It was also a bit of a change because normally, if you think about where you might have your video repository, your library systems, and all the rest of it, and we link out to those an awful lot. But in this case, that's not useful, because if the connection isn't there, then basically someone gets an empty window with nothing in it. So we actually had to think about directly embedding the resources, and that meant thinking also about the size of those resources, the format of those resources, etc. Also have to think a little bit differently about your pedagogy. How does a forum work if we're all responding at completely different times? When do those messages come in? What's the timestamp on them? When does a quiz open? When's it, etc. There were some things to think about. Not only that, but also the assessment obviously needs to be really, really chunked and really carefully managed. And all of that took an awful lot of testing, but it was worthwhile so that we actually had an idea of how these things would behave and we could design for that. And we got there. we built a thing, which shouldn't be that amazing, but as I said, took quite a lot of thinking. And so here you can see, it's a course on an app. There's a variety of different activity types. There are things for people to do. And it's very simple, but I think it's still pretty clear. It hopefully looks quite nice. And the main thing is that it really focuses on what learners need to do and signposting them to that rather than doing anything kind of wildly extravagant. It actually focuses on what they need. But it took us a couple of steps to get there. And I'm going to now pass over to my colleague Joe, who's going to take you through that process.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe. I'm a e-learning content developer at King's Digital. I should say I'm speaking on behalf as well of my colleagues Bobby Apps and Tash Frenzy, who are also involved in this project. They're not here with us today, but of course I always carry them with me in spirit. I want to talk to you in a bit more detail about, maybe in more practical terms, about how we developed for the app, how we translated what we do for King's institutional copy of Moodle that is usually viewed on the browser into something that works separately on the app. What can we do to make the most out of the sort of core Moodle activities that you can already see there that already provide, engaging and dynamic ways to interact with your learning, but, how can we get even more out of that? I mean, one thing that was absolutely crucial was obviously trying to test things, so we are so glad for the existence of emulator software for Android mobiles, because we know that our users are going to be using Android mobile devices. That's what market research says, but we didn't have any in the department, and I don't know if anybody's ever tried to procure anything at a university, but yeah, not worth it. So yeah, the Android emulating software is free. You download it, you set it up, in about 15 minutes you're away. You can choose your Moodle, which version of the Android operating system you want, what device you want it to simulate, how big, and you can also change the connectivity that it has to simulate the bad and worst case scenarios we had to anticipate for our learners to have. We use this in combination with, no surprises, a spreadsheet for testing what would happen. Anybody involved in the project, even a project manager, like a non-technical colleague, could say, "Oh, I wonder if this works." They would add a row to the spreadsheet of like a potential test, and then we would come along and have a go running through it, documenting what we did, what we found, taking screenshots. You can see some screenshots there. You'll see a few more as we go through. The main part of our development journey was, as we've heard already, about components. By this I would mean sort of reusable chunks of HTML or HTML templates that you can use in multiple different pages. Obviously these can form the content of your books, your pages, your lessons, activities, but also they can go into the description of other activities to help frame what the learner's about to do. Here's one that worked. It's very simple, it's very lightweight, it's very versatile. It's just I would call it a view hide element or expand collapse. I mean, it's not groundbreaking, but you can see two versions on this screen grab here. So I like it because the HTML is very simple, right? It's a summary element and a details element, and we added a little bit of inline CSS just to make the padding look much nicer. It has to be inline CSS because, again, as we've heard, Moodle will strip out other CSS, like you try and call in a style sheet and it will strip it out. It'll also strip out any JavaScript you try and call. But yeah, see, this description works, and it's pedagogically versatile. So in the first case, as a view description, or perhaps an alternative to alt text, you can view this as maybe like a side quest in the user's learning, where it's like, oh, by the way, this is an alternative format if you need it. But actually underneath, with a model answer, it's an important part in that sort of learning that you experience as you go through the page, because it invites you to pause for a moment before you interact with the page, right? There's some question there, and you say, what do you think? Pause, then press, and read a model answer. So that's something that worked. Here's something that didn't work. I would call it a float box. It's the thing you can see at the top of the slide there. Okay, this one scrolls, but it's the top of the screen grabs, which I just mean it like a picture and some text side by side, right? Again, nothing innovative, but we wanted to try and have it. We have this on our institutional copy of Moodle, and because we can load in a CSS style sheet there, we can get a picture of like 300 pixels or whatever, and some text beside it, which looks nice on your big browser, your big monitor, your laptop, your desktop. And then on a narrow device, it'll reflow, right? It puts them one under the other. That's not possible for the reasons you can see on the left-hand side. That's the chain of implications, what doesn't work on the app. And what you get is just something that I know on this display it looks massive, but on your actual mobile device it's like literally the size of the nail of your thumb, right? So teeny tiny, it's kind of pointless. Much wiser is to not over-engineer this thing and just have, as you can see at the bottom of the two screen grabs, an image and then text underneath it, right? It's so much more robust and it's just better. So anyway, those are two examples of the outcomes of our development process. I'll give you a quick idea of what it looked like. We started with the components that we already have in our design system. We spoke with our learning designers, said, what components do you prioritize when you're trying to think through the activities that you're storyboarding? They came up with their priorities. We content developers kind of whittled that down to what we thought was or was not likely to work. And then, yes, we iterated. We developed some version. We tested it on the app. We got our colleagues to have a go. Found problems, tried to address them, made a new version, and so on. Eventually, we either got to a version we were happy with, or we ran out of testing time. And then with that version, we took to our web developers that we have in the team. We have a very small number of web developers in the department, so we have to be quite strategic about how we use their time. So they came in at the last stage and gave any final feedback, any yays or nays. So it's that point, for instance, that the view hide component got greenlisted or got approved, whatever, and the float box got binned off. Once we got our final components we were happy with, we stored them in snippet form in a GitHub repository. This is great for us right now because me and my team, we use VS Code all the time to write the HTML that we need to write, and so GitHub can just pull straight into it. It's also useful for the permeability or the portability of the code in future when we're working with partner institutions. They will be able to access the GitHub repository because it lives on the cloud, right? And then we'll all have the same, most up-to-date version of the components. There's two other things that I want to shout out before I hand back. H5P is really good. Again, these are quite lightweight files, but they're quite versatile. We have on the right a list of example H5Ps that we're happy to use. On the left, you can see some screen recordings from a course presentation. H5P, these are two slides. On the top, it's hard to see, but on the top is a fill-in-the-blanks activity. On the bottom is a drag-and-drop activity. You can imagine these slides being interspersed amongst, walls of text. Imagine I said that in a nicer way, where learners are maybe acquiring knowledge or looking at something, and then immediately, bang, they're tested on it, right? Or they're forced to engage with it, which is what you want. I would recommend that you use a H5P activity rather than embedding it in one of your sections. And if you want to know why, then you can ask me in a few minutes. The final thing that I'll mention is using semantic HTML when you're building. Sorry for this technical point, but it's to do with labeling the course content that you make with good labels, meaningful labels. Here's a page on the right that's built entirely out of very simple HTML, the kind of tags that you see on the left. This is fundamental web design, and I know it's, again, not very sort of new and jazzy, but it's fundamental and core for a reason, so it's really, really worth highlighting. It's still, even though these are simple tools, they're incredibly rich. You can do an awful lot, right? Imagine BBC News articles are formatted like this. Wikipedia is largely formatted with kind of stuff you can emulate with this. And yeah, that's recommendations I would make universally, let alone, let alone if you're developing for the app. I pass back to Annora.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Joe. I'm afraid Joe is slightly taller than I am, so I'm going to move that down. So I think you've seen overall that it's been a bit of a journey for us. And the first modules of this actually went live to students this Monday, which was really, really exciting. And just as we've done before, we're testing, right? We tested previously. We will test again with our actual students. We did some on-site testing with students, some usability testing, where actually people were able to show us what they were seeing, to talk through. So we did a little bit of UX testing previously, but we're hoping to do more testing as it overall goes through actually like real students. And so once we've done that, one of the things that we're very keen to do is to actually share this with maybe you, hopefully, I mean, you came to the presentation, so hopefully you're a good use case as to, might be interested. But we went through all this work. They're very simple things, but we hope that they actually make things way more scalable and actually way more applicable. And at least for me, the whole project has prompted me to think again about how we're providing styling, customization, extra functionality within our Moodle, because we think that the app provides a lot of things. Most students would actually want to be on an app most of the time. They have apps for everything else. Why not this? Moodle is rich enough that you might want to have a full app for it, and that you might want to enable people to learn anywhere, especially for fully online distant students. So overall, what I'd say, the message that I'd leave you with is, if you're interested in the guide in due course, then do let us know. We want to release it Creative Commons, but maybe it's not something that you're searching for every day online. Maybe it is. So by all means, come to us if you want kind of a sneak copy. And otherwise, just to leave you with the fact of going back to the basics, thinking about what's really, really important to people, what's really important to the people who are trying to learn, and making sure that the wonderful design ideas that you have aren't getting in the way of the actual learning process, and of making that learning really extendable and collaborative and shareable. So hopefully that's been interesting, and thank you very much, and we look forward to any questions.
Sorry, excuse me, Tim.
I've got, well, one question and one observation, if I may. First question is, are you planning to translate your content, or is it all in English?
So because we're largely working with Anglophone countries initially, and we're partnering with universities whose main languages are, in fact, at least in terms of teaching languages, are English. At the moment, at this first stage, we haven't translated the content yet. Some of the later phases of the project involve working more with local partners actually within those areas and developing more localized content, and at that point we will be. So I think we will look to hopefully support students to use the kind of localization features that Moodle offers by default, but we want to make sure that we've got the content right and then localized before we're actually trying to offer it in maybe, let's say, partial language. We'd rather do it well than just do it badly.
And then the second question, well, statement, are you aware that you can actually style the app? You can add your own CSS.
Yes.
So you can actually overcome the issue you had with the reflow. So if you're aware of it, why haven't you done it?
For two reasons. Because we knew that we had to partner with a range of partners throughout, that it might actually end up on Moodles of people who did not have a branded app. And this is the thing. So we're designing not just for our particular use case, for the students that we know that we'll have, but actually hopefully for students, who will be studying at universities that are completely different or institutions that are different. We really don't have much control over the future environment, so robust is what we're looking for. Thank you very much.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask what assessment tools you find were the most effective on the app?
It's a very good question. I think, in a way, it's really interesting working with quite a constrained palette of tools. I think we've looked at the quizzes, obviously, but some of the limitations for people taking them offline is quite interesting in terms of the kind of robustness that you'd kind of hope to have in terms of like time limits and passwords and all the rest of it. So it's pretty simple at the moment. Some of it is portfolio-based through wikis, because that's at least kind of asynchronous. Some of it is quiz-based, but what we're looking at is working specifically with partners to make sure in a way that we're having kind of timed assessment slots, and those things don't happen too often. And some of those are around the assignment, just to kind of have another way to do it. So we're not doing anything really wild. This is the thing. It's very simple, but just really trying to be mindful of anything that might harm that process. Thank you very much.
I think we're out of time now, so if you want, guys, have any more questions, please come and catch up with the team.
Come and talk to us in due course. Thank you very much.